Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jimi Eads.
Hey, how's it going out there, everybody? Welcome to the Drum Shuffle podcast. Jimi Eads joining you as I do each and every week. This is episode 151. I hope you're all having a fantastic week out there in Drumland. We're having a great week here in Central Kentucky at the world headquarters of the Drum Shuffle. We have a fantastic interview for you today. I am going to be joined by the great and legendary Chris Parker right after this message from our sponsor, Los Cabos Drumsticks. The best kept secret for drummers is finally out. Los Cabos Drumsticks may look like the sticks you grew up with, but these are not your father's drumsticks. Los Cabos Drumsticks is Canada's #1 drumstick brand, and they are coming to a retailer near you. With operations in over 28 countries worldwide, thousands of drummers have already discovered the Los Cabos difference. Using FSC certified wood from Canada and the US, Los Cabos make the finest quality drumsticks, percussion tools, and accessories on the market. The best news, Los Cabos Drumsticks offers you a ton of choice. They have 22 individual drumstick models and 14 percussion tools, many of which are available in 3 different wood types: maple, white hickory, and red hickory. Red hickory comes from the center or heart of the hickory tree and has been independently proven to be both stronger and more elastic than white hickory without adding a lot of weight. While most drumstick manufacturers have shunned red hickory, Los Cabos Drumsticks has embraced it, becoming the only established stick brand in the world to offer a full line of red hickory drumsticks. To learn more about Los Cabos Drumsticks, visit them online at loscabosdrumsticks.com, follow them on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and don't forget to ask for Los Cabos Drumsticks at your favorite retailer. Dare to be different. Join the Red Hickory Revolution with Los Cabos Drumsticks. All right, guys and girls, as I mentioned, we're going to be joined by the great Chris Parker here in just a moment. If you're not familiar with Chris Parker's playing, first of all, shame on you. You should be. But Chris has put together the Chris Parker Trio, and they've released a few records, but they have a new one coming out called Tell Me. It is a fantastic record. His playing is amazing, and it is a smoking hot trio that he has put together. But Chris has literally played with just everybody under the sun. Bonnie Raitt, Paul Butterfield, the list goes on. And of course, he manned the stool at Saturday Night Live for several years in the late 80s and early 90s. He's just so busy in the New York music scene. He has played with everybody. He's just a wealth of information, and I know you're going to get a lot out of this interview. So please help me welcome to the Drum Shuffle podcast, Chris Parker. Hey, good afternoon, Chris. How's it going, man?
All right, Jimi. Thanks for calling. It's going good.
Good.
Cool.
Well, man, thanks for taking time to come on the Drum Shuffle podcast. We appreciate it.
Any shuffle that I can be a part of, I'm happy. I'm happy to be there. There's so many different kinds of shuffles.
I'm telling you now. Well, you know, you kind of complete my trifecta. You, Mark. So this will be. I will now have had the last 3 Saturday Night Live drummers on this program. So I'm trying to complete the set.
Wow.
If you don't mind, let's kind of go back into your history a bit. I alluded to a little bit of it there. But you started playing at a really, really early age. And I've heard some cool stories. I heard that you started playing professionally at like 11 or 12 years old. Is that right?
That is correct. 11 years old were my first paid gigs, backing up strippers.
No way. Backing up strippers?
Yeah, well, exotic dancers, but they were strippers. I mean, the idea was that they, come on in a skimpy outfit and eventually everything comes off.
That's so funny. And, I know your dad was a musician. He was okay with that. His 11-year-old son playing in strip clubs.
Hey, they were happy. I was bringing home $150 and put that into the family pool for food. I had 4 younger brothers, and my father is professionally he's a painter. And at the time, the early 60s, he wasn't doing spectacular. He was working, but it was great to have some extra income coming in for food and clothing and books for school and all that stuff. So they were happy.
That's amazing. I can't even imagine. You were playing professionally at an age before I had even picked up a pair of drumsticks. That's fantastic. So, and I know that kind of transitioned. Your first, I guess, touring gig was with Butterfield, right?
Yes, I was in a rock band before that, and we did a few little tours. We actually did a tour as the opening act for a movie about Jimi Hendrix called Jimi Hendrix at Berkeley. We had the same manager, a guy named Michael Jeffrey, who passed away, and he was kind of breaking us in, and he had this movie to promote. Hendrix had just passed away, and he was trying to capitalize on that. The bigger part of the tour was the movie, then Richie Havens, then us.
Oh, wow.
We were the opening act, and then Richie Havens, and then the actual movie. That was the show.
Wow. Richie Havens. That's some powerful stuff there. So, I mean, you're just a young cat, learning the business and getting to do all these cool things. How did the Butterfield gig come about? Did he see you playing in that setting and offer you a gig?
I don't think he saw me with the rock band, straight eighth notes, and he saw me in a lot of other groups because the rock band called Holy Moses made one album and then sort of drifted apart. And Michael Jeffrey himself, the manager, was killed in a plane crash. So I was in Woodstock, New York, and I played with a lot of different groups. I played with an R&B group. I played with a gospel group. I played with I played with a jazz trio and another organ jazz trio. And I played with a country band, and I played with a bluegrass band. And all these bands, were working various venues around Woodstock, and a lot of times Paul Butterfield was there. I didn't know it was him, but I would see this guy in the background digging the music or staying for a little while and then splitting. So he saw me in all these different contexts before I actually had any, before I actually spoke to him. So when I got the call from him, I thought it was a joke. He said, "This is Paul Butterfield. I wondered if you'd be interested in doing some playing with me." And I said, "Yeah, right." And I hung up on him. But he called right back and he said, "No, really, this is Paul Butterfield. I've been checking you out. I heard you with one of the bands was called the Crawfords. That was a gospel group. And another one was called, I don't know, the some kind of jazz trio. I heard you with these different bands, and I dig your feel." And so I forget what else he said, but he said, "Let's get together and do some playing." And I said, "Sure." And that's kind of the way it happened. And there were a couple of different configurations. It started with he and Jeff Moldar, who was in the Tim Kweskin Doug band, and he was kind of a luminary from Massachusetts folk scene and blues scene. He and Jeff Moldar knew this guitarist, Amos Garrett, from Canada, from Toronto. And they had an organist and a bass player from San Francisco, Merle Saunders, great organist who passed away, and John Kahn, great bass player who's, as far as I know, he's still around. And he was kind of in the Grateful Dead scene and San Francisco music scene, really great bass player. So they got those two guys from San Francisco and me and Jeff Moldar and Amos Garrett and Paul, and we started playing. We did a little summer tour, kind of the Northeast, and it was good. It was fun. It was incredible for me, to be with these really great players and great bass player, great organist, great guitarist, and Jeff Moldar and Paul were both singing, so there were nice vocals. I don't know. I think they had been getting together, previously, maybe just to sing together. Anyway, we did a summer tour, and then John Kahn and Merle Saunders had to go back to San Francisco. They had commitments out there with, there was a band that was an offshoot of the Grateful Dead called Old and In the Way, with Jerry Garcia and a couple other guys. That was one thing they were doing. And Merle Saunders was a well-known jazz organist. He had all kinds of gigs in the Bay Area and in Sausalito and in San Diego, and he did the whole West Coast scene. He had his own quartet. So when they went back, we were looking for, Paul and Jeff were looking for an organist and a bass player, and they got this guy, Ronnie Barron, from New Orleans, incredible pianist and organist and incredible vocalist, and they got a great bass player, Billy Rich, from Denver, who played with Taj Mahal, still plays with Taj Mahal. And they came east, and we started rehearsing, and it got pretty good pretty fast. So we did a record, and then tours, and another record, and some more touring, and we did radio shows, and they used to have a thing from the record plant, live from the record plant in Sausalito, and some TV shows like Midnight Special.
Yeah.
But that was at a professional level that I had been a part of before, and I was, I loved it. It was great, and Paul and Jeff and Amos and Ronnie and Billy Rich were all huge influences on me to become a better musician and a better player and more of a musicologist, get acquainted with lots of other styles of music besides what I had been playing, which was jazz and blues and gospel and rock, basically. I wasn't aware of a lot of the folk stuff other than Bob Dylan and I can't think of the guy's name now. There were certain, Woody Guthrie. I was familiar with, and Pete Seeger and stuff, but not, can you still hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, okay, great. Anyway, sorry, I'm kind of running off.
No. This is all great because, I know that was kind of your, baptism by fire, so to speak, as a really young player. I think you were probably 19, 20 years old when all this was going on.
19.
Yeah. So, I just can't imagine what kind of education that must have been. It's kind of like, drinking from the fire hose, so to speak, and then I know that, that kind of transitioned your career into, you mentioned the record plant. I know you started doing a lot of studio work in the early 70s.
Right.
And your recording credits are just absolutely mind-boggling. Everybody that you've recorded with, and we can go through any of that you want to, but being in that scene and recording with so many different artists, I would assume, with all those guys saying, hey, you need to familiarize yourself with all these different genres, get comfortable in all of them. I can only imagine, but that had to help you as you started transitioning into more and more session work, right?
Absolutely. At first I was just recording in Woodstock. There was basically at that time only the one studio that Albert Grossman owned, Bearsville Studios. And that's where Butterfield recorded. We did both albums there. Actually the second album we did he had a residence further down the mountain called Turtle Creek. And they had a remote truck from the record plant that came up, and that was like a nice playing room, and they brought all the recording equipment. I mean, they brought the microphones in, but the recording equipment itself stayed in the truck. But those were still the only actual, full-fledged recording studio environments that I was involved in. And as Woodstock, after the festival, Woodstock became like a center for music, kind of a mecca for a lot of people. More and more people started to come to Woodstock and would say, who's a drummer we can get? And they would call me. So I did Bonnie Raitt album and Karen Dalton album. I worked with Happy and Artie Traum, a lot of people that lived there. There was a group called Borderline. There were a lot of different groups, and everybody recorded at the studio at either Bearsville or the Turtle Creek, or Todd Rundgren kind of had a rudimentary studio of his own. I did an early record with him. There was this French synthesizer guy, Jean-Yves Labat, crazy as a loon. His music was a graph, a colored graph. There were no notation per se, but he had me read this colored graph along with he had like a giant ARP synthesizer and an early Moog synthesizer. That was some crazy stuff. I don't know whatever happened to it, but anyway, yeah, it was my own homework that I assigned myself to get more acquainted with more styles, whether it was deeper into the blues and researching guys like Fred Belo or Sonny Freeman or the New Orleans drummers Ed Blackwell and Jim Black and Freddie Staley and the older guys, Baby Daz and Zooty Singleton, and I really got more into those guys and more into more ethnic music, Japanese music and Bulgarian music and Native American Indian music, whatever I could find, literally, in the record store, in the bins. I would spend, hours at the record store looking for stuff that I had never heard before, and some of it was, oh yeah, I get this, and some of it was like, oh my God, listen to what these guys are doing, whether it was Balinese music, where they're doing all this hand clapping and playing on gamelons and stuff, a lot of, or the West African stuff, stuff from different parts of Africa, reggae, all this Caribbean music, music from Dominican Republic, music from Haiti, music from Jamaica, and further down, Trinidad and Tobago. That's what's so great about music. It's never ending. You can keep exploring music the rest of your life. I'll never get to all of it, but I'm hungry to hear more all the time, which is great.
Yeah, well, and I mean, I think that's the mark of a true artist, right? Is the never-ending quest to listen to it all.
Yeah.
It
is a quest, indeed.
I mean, I don't know. There are so many players that I talk to that they're like, well, I only listen to the blues, or I only listen to jazz, and to me that seems very short-sighted. I'm not knocking any of those folks. If that's your thing, that's your thing. But there's just so much good music out there. I mean, I think there's two kinds of music, good and bad, right? And taste is subjective. But
yeah, Duke Ellington said that, I think. There's only good music and bad music.
Yeah.
But yeah, all the different all the different styles, all the different international flavors, can only, by listening to it, can, influence whatever genre you're currently playing, The West African stuff definitely can influence jazz, that's where that beat came from. Ding, jing, ding, jing, ding. They turned it around in West Africa and made it jinga-jing, jinga-jing, jinga-jing.
Yeah.
But that ride cymbal beat, is originally from Yoruba people in West Africa. So all those things, that early jazz players and Max Roach and Joe Jones and Elvin Jones, and adopted that stuff and adapted it to the traditional drum set, and played that beat on the ride cymbal instead of playing it on a cowbell or a log, basically, So, I mean, that's just one example. There, all the different influences that you listen to can only enrich your own creativity, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I'm going to jump around a little bit here, but I am curious about, your time in the Saturday Night Live band, because I know that led to, we've got to talk about Bob Dylan, because I know you did some work with Bob. And of course there's that G.E. Smith connection there.
Yep.
But if my timeline is correct, you replaced Steve Ferrone in the Saturday Night Live band as drummer. Is that correct?
Yep. 86.
Okay.
Right.
So you were there 86 to 91. And then I think you had my pal, Matt Chamberlain, came in after you and stayed just a year or two. And then of course our buddy Sean Pelton has been in that chair ever since. And you talk about a cool cat, man. Sean is just, he's the cat's pajamas, as they say. But, talk to me a little bit about that, because one of the things that I get asked about a lot from our listeners, especially after I had Matt and Sean on the show, was, how much prep goes into doing the Saturday Night Live gig. And I would imagine that that's a pretty tall order every week, right?
It was during the time. Yeah. I don't know if Matt did a full season, because they called me back for the back of 91 and 90, and then I was there again in 92. That was my last year.
Well, he may have gotten the Pearl Jam call during that time, possibly.
Yeah, exactly. Or Edie Brickell and the New Bohemians, or something else he was doing, and they called me back. Steve Ferrone I knew from the old days at McKell's when I was in a band called Stuff, and Steve was in Average White Band, and some of those guys would come up to McKell's. And Steve was, amazingly popular at Atlantic Records. He would work with Arif Martin on all these great records, Chaka Khan records, as well as the Average White Band. And we were good friends. I mean, they were lots of things in common, tap dancing and his great drumming style and stuff. I was a great admirer of his. So when they called and said you're replacing Steve Ferrone, and Steve Ferrone had to got a call to do Duran Duran, I think is when he left Saturday Night Live. So I came in at the end of that year. Anyway, there is a lot of prep involved, depending on what the show is about and how many skits they have that are going to require music. Or in the old days, when I was doing it, there was often a guest artist, whether it was Elvis Costello or Paul Simon or Aaron Neville and Linda Ronstadt or Leo Sayer or Eric Clapton or Sting or somebody who would want to do some music as well as host the show, or would want to do music, a music segment, but they didn't bring their own band at those times. They would pick, members of the Saturday Night Live band to play with them. So I got to play with a lot of great folks that way. And in the really early days, in 75, I used to get called to play with an artist who was appearing on Saturday Night Live, and they would put together a New York band, like I did Boz Scaggs and a bunch of different people, where someone would, I guess Lou Delgado would contract a rhythm section or a band to play behind a certain artist. And then when I was actually on the show, they did that not as much because people were bringing their own self-contained bands more often, unless it was, Paul Simon or Quincy Jones or someone we would back up. But yeah, there was, you go in on Thursday to do pre-records and rehearse with Kevin Nealon and Mike Myers, to do We Want to Pump You Up, or Wayne's World, Dana Carvey, Phil Hartman. Depending on what the show was, you wouldn't know until middle of that week. Okay, we're going to need you for Thursday pre-record and a rehearsal on Friday with Paul Simon, who's coming in to host the show, and then Saturday morning you got to be there the whole day. And things change, on a dime. We do the dress rehearsal 8 to 11. And the dress rehearsal is usually long because they're still trying out skits, They have too much material. They have more than can fit into 90 minutes of programming. So even though you play those things, they may be cut before the actual live, at 11:30. And you never know, who's going to make it, what skit is going to make it, or a couple of times they even cut the second musical number. We were playing with somebody and it's Lorne Michaels' decision, the producer's decision.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, you just really have to be on your toes to do that gig, because
totally,
I mean, from 1 second to the next, you may not even know what's going on. Just, hey, we're cutting this piece and going into the next one. Right.
Yeah. No, lots of times, I actually ran into Lenny Pickett on the street yesterday, and we talked about the old days. And Leon Pendarvis, the conductor, has been there now for 38 or 39 years. So there were times when Leon Pendarvis, were just pointing 3, 4, not even 4. I would get 4 to back somebody up who was coming on. Or just play something, and he would play something. There was another great pianist, Cheryl Hardwick, who was there, and she would come up with things on the spot, classical style or a blues style or some jazzy thing, and Pendarvis would play and just listen to what Cheryl was playing and fit in there. Same thing with GE. He would say, blues, key of G.
Yeah.
And 3, 4, here's the tempo, and you just got to jump right in.
Well,
he did one thing that somebody posted recently with when Valerie Bertinelli was the host, but she had her boyfriend, or I guess her husband, Eddie Van Halen, came on, and GE wrote this cool blues shuffle with stops in it. I forget what he called it, so that Eddie could come and play with the band. And it's exciting because it was all spur of the moment. And he's an amazing, GE is a great guitarist, but Eddie Van Halen is like unique. He was totally unique player. So that was a very exciting segment, where he's sitting in and GE is kind of writing the tune as he goes along.
Yeah. I mean, just amazing stuff. And I'm curious, is that kind of what led you to the Bob Dylan gig? Because, I mean, obviously I don't know, but everybody says that playing with Bob Dylan is kind of the same way, that it's live without a net, because Bob doesn't do set lists, and he may decide to do an old spiritual hymn from 1785 in the middle of a show. Was that your experience playing in Bob's band?
A lot of it was, yeah, definitely. We did have a set list, but a lot of times he would leave that set list and play, as you said, 1785. We'd play Barbara Allen, which I happen to know from the original A Christmas Carol movie with Alistair Sim. One of the final scenes in the movie is when Scrooge comes back to accept his nephew's invitation for dinner, and when he opens the door, somebody's at the piano playing Barbara Allen, and all the couples are dancing in the room, and then he joins the party. Very touching scene. But I always loved that song for that reason. It goes with that scene in the movie. Bob loved that. We played that often. But he would also play, Woody Guthrie things and Lead Belly things and different folk, spirituals and folk songs and stuff, a lot of which I had never heard before. I just fall in, and try to make it sound good. Try to get with Bob, whatever he's playing. But yeah, the whole Bob thing came about with GE. And at the time it was T-Bone Woke on bass. And he said one day, how would you feel about playing with Bob Dylan? I said, sure, let's do it. And as far as I knew, it was just a jam. I never thought it was an audition. So we went to this place called Montana Rehearsal Studio, and we played, 50 or 80 different tunes, not all Bob tunes. We played Beach Boys tunes, God Only Knows. We played Hank Williams songs. We played Johnny Cash songs, and we did play some of Bob's stuff from earlier albums. I remember playing Heart of Mine, which is one of my favorite Bob Dylan songs.
Yeah.
We never played like a Rolling Stone. I think we did play, Subterranean Homesick Blues and Maggie's Farm and a couple of the more familiar ones. It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, Tangled Up in Blue, Boots of Spanish Leather. A lot of these I was familiar with, but not the way he was doing them. We just tried to fit in and make it sound good and have fun, and I had no idea it was an audition. But I don't know if we did just a day or 2 days. Seems like we did more than one day because we played a lot of different material. And then his manager at the time said, what does your June look like? I said, looks like, the beginning of summer. And then they laid out, well, would you be available for 3 months, starting in June and going to the end of August? June, July, and August. I said, sure. So that happened, and it was fun. It was great. It was great to play with Bob. And T-Bone Woke at the time was the musical director for Hall & Oates. So he declined. He didn't want to do it. He didn't want to leave Hall & Oates. So then we got a guy named Kenny Aronson on bass, who's still around, great bass player, and he's the one who did that tour and subsequent tours, because after 3 months, everybody says goodbye, and so then you get a call a week later, can you do the end of September to November? Okay, another 3 months. And then, at the end of November, they say, what are you doing in January? So that's why they call it the never-ending tour, because they kept adding dates, as Bob was comfortable. I'm assuming he was comfortable and wanted to keep doing it, and his manager and booking agent and stuff kept, putting in things. And we would do the U.S., then we did Canada, then we did Europe, then we did Scandinavia, then we did not Far East, but the Middle East, and then back to back to different venues in America, and then Canada. This went on for almost 4 years,
That's amazing.
And it was great. He was wonderful. He was, he's a genius for one thing, and this was when I remember him turning 50 on the road. So he was still playing a lot of acoustic guitar. He played great electric guitar. He played harmonica. He sang great. And it was a joy, it was a pleasure backing him up, and everybody on the tour was great. GE was great. Kenny Aronson was great. And then at a certain point, Tony Garnier came in to replace Kenny, and he's been there ever since. 30 years later, he's still doing it.
Yeah,
which is great. I'm happy for him.
Yeah, wow, man. I mean, that right there is a career, Chris. I mean,
yeah.
you know what I mean? Like, if you hung up your boots then, you won.
Yeah.
And there's just so much more, but so I'll transition this way. This won't be a very good segue, but you did all of these amazing gigs, all this great recording, Saturday Night Live, Bob Dylan, Cher's in there, Michael Bolton, all these great things that you've done. But at some point you have migrated back towards jazz. Not that it ever left, but you've now hung your shingle out as a band leader and a composer. Talk to me a little bit, because that's one of the themes of this show is, so often as drummers, we're viewed only as sidemen or sidewomen, right? And we're always beholden to an artist needing our services. But one of the themes that we talk about all the time is we should all at least attempt to take control of our own careers. We're capable musicians, capable to compose, and we can lead a band. So talk to me a little bit about your decision somewhere along the way to do just that.
Well, I always had bands, from 2 or 3 years after the backing up the Strippers, I knew that I wanted to have my own bands. And I started with, traditional rock bands, guitar, bass, and drums, and then added keyboard. And then by the time I was in beginning of high school, I guess it really appealed to me to have horns in the band. So 3 of my friends played trombone, tenor sax, and trumpet, and the band now included them. And it was because I wanted to do more R&B. And I was, fortunately for me, there are no tapes of me as the lead vocalist, but I was singing, the R&B hits of the day as well as rock hits and stuff until we made a demo and I heard myself back. And then we hired singers. But I've always, the idea of leading the band appealed to me. The idea of composing always appealed to me. And I wrote, primitive tunes for those bands. And I wrote primitive tunes for the rock bands that I was in. And some were rejected flat out. No, we ain't going to play that shit. But by the time I was in stuff, with those guys, it took a lot of guts to bring in tunes that I had written with stuff in mind, with Richard T. and Eric Gale and Cornell Dupree and Gordon Edwards in mind. I thought these are going to be these are songs that they could really get their teeth into, and they would have fun playing. And I remember the first time I brought one in, Gordon, the bass player, it was maybe, I think because I copied it in longhand, it was maybe 6 or 7 pages long. And he unfurled it and yelled at me, "What do you think you are, Tchaikovsky?" But they played it. And eventually, when he called that tune on the bandstand, he called it the Ugly Duckling. He said, "Let's play Ugly Duckling," because the tune kind of evolved, from a Ugly Duckling into this swan where everybody got to play and the audience liked it. And it featured Steve playing, these ridiculous fills leading into letter A of the tune. And it had a section for Eric Gale to do his thing, and it had a section for Cornell Dupree to do his thing. That was very satisfying, that they agreed to play it, and that it eventually became, part of the repertoire. I had a couple of tunes that I brought in. So that was inspiring, and by the time stuff was over, I was writing more for a band I had called Joe Cool. A couple of my tunes were recorded by them, and I think around that same time, early 80s, I went back to school. I went to Juilliard and studied composition and studied harmony and theory, and then I went to Mannes College of Music. Then I also went to the New School for Social Research, which is now part of NYU School of Music. And then I finally got the degree going to Western Connecticut State University. And I was, all the time refining my compositional skills and listening to more jazz, listening to more of everything. But jazz appealed to me more and more. So this is the third Chris Parker Trio album. And I have a couple of tunes on the first one, a couple of more tunes on the second one, and this one is basically all my tunes except for the version of a Monk tune that we do, the opening tune. Otherwise, most of the tunes are mine. So, and I think they're getting better.
Well, I mean, just from an outsider's perspective, and the record that we're talking about right now is Tell Me, which is out on September 30th everywhere.
Right.
I've been spending some time with the record, listening to it, and I'll put it this way: I have thoroughly enjoyed it. It's a brilliant record. It sounds phenomenal. This is, I wouldn't have known that. How do I want to say this? I wouldn't have known that you composed all of this, and that's not taking anything away from you, but you put it on and you just get lost in the music and you're like, wow, this is just a great jazz trio, just ripping, So congratulations on having a fantastic record that's coming out here in just a couple of days.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Jamie.
You're welcome. It just sounds phenomenal. Again, I'm not a jazz head per se. I'm a rock guy, but again, good music and bad music, right? I've listened through the album several times and have thoroughly enjoyed all of it.
Great. That's great to hear.
Yeah. So talk to me a little bit about the trio because, I think everybody obviously knows there's different ways to compose a trio, but talk to me a little bit about your bandmates in the Chris Parker Trio and, the recording of this album because it's brilliant.
Well, the pianist Kyoko Oyobe, I met, it's 11 years ago would be, I think that's accurate. We met at a jam session and I just love her touch. I love her rhythmic interpretation, and of course her harmonies. And when she solos, it's unpredictable. And I know that she draws on a lot of different piano influences, as well as her native Japan music, Okinawan folk songs and koto music and stuff. I mean, there's nothing I can throw at her that she doesn't say, how about this, and comes up with an approach to the tune that always makes me smile, always, or makes me laugh right out loud. Oh my God, how did she throw that over these changes? This is great. So I really dig her as a player and as a person. She's a wonderful person. She's married to a bass player. We do one of his tunes on the first Trio album, and he's a composer, wonderful guy, French. They now have Theo is 4 years old, I think, 4 or 5. And so I just dig her approach. Piano is a percussive instrument, but she plays percussively and dynamically, and she can, as you can hear on the record, her style is very fluid and yet sensitive, and empathic. She'll listen to what else is going around. That's any good jazz player, is that way. Listens to what else is happening and comments on it, or builds on it, or interprets it, and then spits it out a different way. So she's great that way. And I recently played with her because I needed somebody to cover a rehearsal for another gig. I have this other band called East Coast Meeting with a great singer named Dennis Collins, and the pianist in the band was unavailable, so I had her come and sight read some of these tunes, and she was great. And the 2 other guys in the band said, wow, where did she come from? But she's very adaptable, and the same, almost everything I said applies to Amin Salim as well. We met when Kyoko and I were looking for a place to play on a regular basis, and we found this great sushi restaurant that's not there anymore on 7th Avenue South, and they had a upright piano and they had a set of drums there. I said, this is perfect. Let's start here. And we tried a bunch of different bass players, a lot of them really good, but Amin came in and just nailed it. And Kyoko and I both looked at each other and said, this is the guy. Because he's a very forceful player, very rhythmic, great ideas. He's like a gentle giant. He's forceful, but the sweetest guy in the world. Great solo ideas, and same thing, with my material. He'll say, okay, all right, let's count it off, and he'll tackle it and bring something very special to it, and very something I wouldn't have thought of without his help, and a drummer friend of mine, Tim Horner, said, you guys have a nice hookup, which I had never heard before, but that's what it is. We have a nice hookup. We kind of lock in with each other, not like Duck Dunn and Al Jackson Jr. or Dave Garibaldi and Rocco LaPrista, Tower of Power guys, but a nice jazz hookup where it's fluid, but it's the time is there, So he's a great partner, a great rhythmic partner, and a great melodic partner. And between him and Kyoko, I have no fear of tackling some new composition of mine. I'll bring it in and show it to them as long as it's written out correctly. Count it off and see what they do with it. And I'm guaranteed to be happy. That's happened every time that we've recorded. They bring something special to the proceedings, and I'm always happy with the result.
Well, and that's where the magic is You know, if the composer is always happy with the end result, that's the sauce, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so let me ask you this, and I've asked all of our, prior guests on this podcast who compose, and the answer is usually the same. But when you sit down to compose, are you starting rhythmically, or are you starting from a melodic standpoint, or does it depend?
It's always different. I mean, that sounds cliche, but it is always different. I mean, certain tunes start out with a bass line. I figure out a bass line either on my Fender Precision or on the lower half of the piano. Come up with a bass line that I think is cool, and then maybe record a little of that and try to come up with a drum beat that I think is cool, or a drum, not a beat per se, but a feel that would work with that bass line, and then maybe add the melodic material on top of that. Other tunes, like on the album Desaparecido, the second tune, I had those changes and that melody first. I was playing that melody and those kind of tango figures at the ends of the melody sections first, before I had a drum beat or before the bass line was written. And let's see, Minky Don't You Weep, kind of the same thing. I was playing those changes before I came up with the bass line or the bridge to the tune. But I just like those changes, and they kind of work as an intro, and then they're incorporated into the rest of the tune under a rhythmic bed. So every tune is a little different. Inferno Avenue, that one started with lyrics. I wrote this, 5 verses of lyrics that's all about recovery and being in hell, and it had all these metaphorical references, brimstone and the smell of sulfur and the devil, and I was in a dark place, as they say, and trying to come out of it. And I had those lyrics before I wrote the changes or the melody or the feel. The feel is kind of dirgy, but it works for the lyric, and it works for the melody, which is pretty chromatic changes. But so every tune starts with something different, a germ of an idea, either rhythmically or harmonically or lyrically, and then I try to expand on it, and I've got a bunch of stuff on my phone, voice memos. I think my memory is pretty full. But I have, little 4-bar phrases from something I recorded on the piano, or I'm on the street and I hear something and I sing something into the voice memo. Or I sometimes, I'm waiting for a train or waiting at the corner, and somebody's having this loud conversation next to me, but the cadence of their conversation is inspiring. Just the way they're talking, and they'll put on record it right then, and then take that cadence and turn that into something, a rhythmic figure, or the idea for a new tune, or the beginning of a new tune, maybe. And they're not all, there's a lot of green apples, as somebody said. They're not all gems to start with, and some, come out in a burst of creativity, and the song is done by the end of the afternoon. And some of them I've got to kind of try to craft, well, this part is good up to here, but it really needs a bridge, and it needs some kind of a pre-chorus leading into the chorus, try to dissect it. There's a great book by a friend of mine named Billy Seidman called Elements of Songcraft. where he addresses, what it is to write a song and how the ideas come about and how you build on an idea and how to edit your ideas, probably most important of all, because a lot of people are very creative and we come up with all kinds of stuff. But it's getting to the salient points, getting to the actual inherent message, what you're really trying to say and how you're really trying to say it in the most sincere way and in the most economical way. Not every song can be 7 minutes. It's great if you can get it down to 2.5 minutes or 3 minutes, and say what you're trying to say and get out.
Yeah. Well, so many things come to mind. I just remember, Joe Perry saying that, when you go into the studio to record an album, you have this guy called a producer and he's telling you which of your children get to grow up.
That's great. That's a great metaphor.
But when I listened to this, I just found the record to be, sometimes you put on a jazz trio record and it's very, the word I'm looking for is specific. Like it's very, to the point, and maybe too specific. This is a record that I think, I'll listen to for the rest of my life for sure. Oh, it's just one of those records. Yeah. But it's one of those records that you can put on and, I don't want to say this in a bad way, but you can go on with your day, right? Like it's not going to suck the air out of the room. Some records do that in a good way and a bad way, right? But this is absolutely a record that you can put on and, if you're still at home working, you can get your work day done. And it's just a joyful little soundtrack to your day. That's great. Yeah. And I hope that's what you were going for because that's absolutely what comes across. It's just a wonderful listen. So I guess my curiosity is the trio now your main creative outlet, or are you still doing other stuff? Are you still doing other sessions and teaching and all those things as well?
The trio, this record is very important to me, and I'm glad that it's coming out. And I want to get the trio together to do some gigs. The difficulty is that Amin lives in Rome. He married an Italian lady, and they have Nima is 7 or 8 now, maybe, and they live in Rome. That's his scene, and he does a lot of jazz gigs over there. I think he's going to London, maybe there right now, to play with Joe Locke, great vibes player, somewhere, Ronnie Scott's or 606 Club or somewhere in London. And I'm trying to get him to come to New York for a period, and if I know that he's going to be in New York or in D.C. where his folks live, I'll try to line up some gigs. But if I can book him for recording and he can build other things around that, maybe I can get him to come to New York for that. I have maybe 6, possibly 7 new tunes that are close to being ready to be recorded. So I would start the 4th Chris Parker Trio album if he's going to be available. But no, while that is, a finished project, or this album is a finished project, I do other things. I mentioned this band, East Coast Meeting, I have with this great vocalist, Dennis Collins, and a rhythm section and tenor sax as well. We just did a gig last week at the Sugar Bar in my neighborhood here, and it was really fun. It turned out really well. Dennis is a great vocalist in the style of Donny Hathaway or Marvin Gaye or Johnny Hartman. He can croon, but he can also like Roberta Flack who we work with a lot, great vocalist, and I'm writing tunes that I hope he will sing if I can get him to listen to them.
Yeah, right on.
But we haven't recorded anything, and I think that would be the next step with that band. Let's get in the studio and record a couple of these things with vocals and try to get a deal or try to get a some kind of production deal or get somebody interested in it. You know, go in the studio and record 3 or 4 things that we have ready to play. And like I've got a project tomorrow with this great bass player, Lincoln Schleifer, who is producing a friend of his who's coming up from Key West. And I have no idea what the material is like at all, but Lincoln called me and said, you know, we want your input, bring something special to it, and could be jazzy or it could be smooth jazzy or it could be R&B. He said, just bring all those hats. Bring all that, you know, keep an open mind, which I always do, and see what we come up with. So I'm excited to do that tomorrow. On the weekend, I've got gigs with this kind of not really a review. It's they call it the 60s show, and it's a nice band, and we do only songs from the 60s, you know, like Donovan and the Zombies and some Beatles and some Stones and some Zombies and some Glenn Campbell and Monkees and Love and Spoonful. It's 2 hours worth of music that's really fun to play. You know, it's the music I grew up with and that I was the lead singer for in the bands that I had when I was a teenager and a pre-teenager. So, we can't record, but it's a fun band to play with. And we've got gigs booked through November, December. And that's just a fun thing to go play, you know, since it's music I grew up with. But there's a lot of different projects going on, you know, singer-songwriter projects and things of my own and the band I mentioned. And a future trio album. So, and I have a couple of students, you know, I teach via Zoom or somebody comes to my studio in the city. And usually it's 1 or 2 lessons. A couple of guys I had, you know, stayed with me for 12 or 15 lessons, you know, and I give as much as I can in one lesson, you know, try to touch all these different bases and get people excited about their own playing. And not so much, you know, what I did on this record or what technique I have or why I am successful. Actually, I do touch on that. Why are you successful? I try to give them the formula. Here's why I am successful or have been successful. It could all end tomorrow, Jamie. You never know.
Yeah. You don't have to tell me, but.
So, and that's very gratifying, you know, to have a student who goes on to become a good player and discovers. The most exciting thing about it is that student discovers his own voice and discovers that, hey, you know what? I'm badass. I can do this. I can play this. And that seeing that excitement, you know, seeing that light bulb go off above his head or her head is very gratifying. So, and if I can do that in one lesson, I'm as happy as they are. You know, it doesn't have to be a long, drawn out thing. Here are the books. Here's the technique you should get together. Here's what helped me. Here's what I think about when I'm playing. You know, I try to lay it all out there and share as much as I can.
Yeah. Well, having that light bulb go off above the student's head, that's 80% of the battle.
That's right.
You know, once you find the keys to the car, it becomes a whole lot easier to drive, right? That's the analogy I'll use. But, you know, I'll just say this, you know, from a personal note, We were up in the city in July. My daughter is a pre-professional ballet dancer, so the schools she's looking at is Juilliard, NYU, Columbia. You know, we're definitely going to be city dwellers, I think, next year. So you can count on at least one lesson for me in the very near future. I'd love to do a couple of things with you.
That'd be great, man.
Yeah,
that'd be great
for sure. But Chris, we're going to send some folks your way for this new record that's just absolutely brilliant. Again, it's called Tell Me. It is out on September 30th, everywhere you can find fine music. And your web address is chrisparkerdrums.com. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, good.
No, that's it.
But, it's an open invite. Anytime you have a new trio release, if the other band does some recording, I would love to have you back. I feel like we've only just scratched the surface. So,
Well, I really appreciate it, Jamie. You've said some wonderful things and gives me wonderful feedback on the record, which is really great to hear.
No, and I'm sincere. It's a great record. I have thoroughly enjoyed it, and I will continue enjoying it for a long time to come. But Chris, please keep us posted here on this show. Anytime you want to come back and talk, you're always welcome. But I've just thoroughly enjoyed having you here. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Jamie. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. We'll talk soon.
All right.
All right, guys and girls, that's going to wrap up episode 151 of the Drum Shuffle podcast. As always, thank you so much for listening to this show and downloading it. We simply can't continue without all of you doing that week after week. As I do every week, I'm going to ask you to hit the subscribe button, the thumbs up, the heart, the smiley emoji, whatever it is on the platform that you use to listen to this program. Hit that so you don't miss any of our great upcoming interviews that we have coming up over the next several weeks. The biggest thing you can do to help us is share a link with a friend. It costs you nothing and it means the world to us, and I sincerely thank you for those efforts. We answer every single email that we get here at the podcast. That email address is thedrumshufflepodcast@gmail.com. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com, and you can always find more information on me over at jamieeads.com. I hope all of you have a fantastic week. I am on my way out for vacation as I get this episode ready to publish, so getting some needed R&R on my side, and I hope you guys can all do the same. Have a great week. Until next time, may your head stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers, everybody.